Hello, Michael over here. So today I want to talk about some of the pieces that you will be choosing from for your rhetorical analysis. And a rhetorical analysis is really tricky to do. To reiterate, what we're doing with rhetorical analysis is looking at a piece of writing or a piece of film or even a photograph and looking at the techniques or strategies that an author uses in order to prove his or her point. Um, One analogy that I like to use to sort of explain this further is that if I walked outside and it was a really beautiful day and I wanted to capture the day, I could do that in any number of ways. I could take a picture of it, I could do a drawing of it, I could create a painting, I could write a poem. But what I chose, the method I chose, would have a different effect, right? So, for example, a picture captures the day exactly as it was, whereas a painting or a drawing allows me to change things or enhance things or whatnot, just as a poem allows me to focus on certain elements of the day. So, when we look at how someone puts together an argument, we're looking at the same types of things. Why did they choose to write a essay or a speech instead of a poem or a short story? In doing that, we also have to kind of look at the palette, if you will, of skills or strategies that they use. Did they use an allusion? That is, did they make a reference to something outside of the text? And a lot of the time we see an allusion as a biblical allusion, a reference in something, a speech, to the Bible or another religious text. Do they use repetition? Do they repeat themselves? Do they repeat words or ideas? Do they use specific images or imagery? All of these things and more are strategies that we can use. Um, when we look at and think about Soapstone, and hopefully you watched that article, um, or watch the video rather, you kind of learn that Soapstone is an acronym that stands for speaker, who is speaking, and I would say that's not simply, John F. Kennedy is speaking, for example, but John F. Kennedy is speaking as the new president recently elected to the United States, or that Frederick Douglass is speaking as a former slave in a country which still allows slavery, right? So those are actually very important. We also look at occasion, when and why this speech was given. Kennedy, in his inaugural address, was speaking because it was his inauguration. But he's also speaking at a time when the world was in the middle of all these other tensions between democratic capitalism and socialism and communism and all of these other things, as well as the beginning of the Cold War and nuclear tensions. So, all of these ideas as well. Audience plays into this. Who is a person speaking to? And sometimes I have students and I say, well, who are you writing your paper for? And they will say, for everyone. And I think that that is a dangerous territory to sneak into because we are never writing for everyone, just as we're never speaking for everyone. We are always targeting our message to a specific audience. Much as right now, I'm aware that my audience is made up of you all who are students. Now, might I approach this differently if I were speaking to even a different age group? If I were speaking to high school students or middle school students or even elementary school students, I would change the way that I present my material. I'm also aware of the medium in which I'm presenting this, which is by video lecture, which also means that I can't see your faces and I can't react to who you are as an audience, right? Purpose. Purpose is something that I always want you to have in mind, not only in the writing and messages and communications of other people, but in your own. Purpose is what they're trying to accomplish. So we could argue that perhaps Kennedy was trying to unite the world and establish his presence and his leadership in the United States at the beginning of the 1960s. Subject is kind of the overall message that's being conveyed, right, more thematically. And then tone incorporates things like word choice, which words are being used, things like celebration of freedom, which Kennedy uses, or fetters and chains, which Douglas uses, are very specific word choices and call to mind a certain emotional response from the reader. So before we get too much into this, I want to kind of think about how we approach these arguments, and I want to start with an example from my own life. So what I want to look at is kind of what would happen if we thought about how we convince other people of things. So, right, imagine you're trying to convince a reluctant friend or family member to do something for you, right? How do you decide how to convince them? Well, it probably has to do with your relationship with them, the purpose, and the occasion, right? At the very least. So here's an example. Let's say I'm trying to convince my friend Adam to join me for a hike. And Adam's got a lot of work to do and he's pretty stressed out. And I know that he's going to say he's stressed and that he doesn't have time to go on a hike. But I haven't spent much time with him in a while. And the context here, sort of background context, is that we used to be roommates and I was the best man he was the best man at my wedding and I was the best man at his. This is true, by the way. So that context there at the bottom is something that explains who I am as the speaker and who he is as the audience. And there is always a relationship between speaker and audience. So the hypothetical soapstone example. So Adam knows that I'm a close friend. He knows who I am. We've spent a lot of time together. The occasion is I want to go on a hike and spend some time with my buddy, right? Audience, of course, like I said, I know him and I know he likes hiking and I also know that he's very busy. My purpose, my sole objective is to convince my friend Adam to join me on this hike, right? And the subject is kind of a hike or recreation. And because of all of this, my tone is likely to be pretty friendly, right? After all, I know what won't work. I know that I can't threaten him, right? The dude is tougher than I am, so he would beat me up and I wouldn't get to go on my hike. I can't bribe him, right? There's probably nothing that I can offer him, like, short of $1 billion that would get him to go on this hike with me. So what I need to do is appeal to him as a friend, and the best way to do this is maybe to play a little bit on his sense of guilt and maybe show him how it will benefit him. I also know that he's willing to stand up for himself and say no if it's really not a benefit to him. So my strategy is, first I have to appeal to him, remind him subtly about our friendship. I could say, remember that time when we went hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains and your wife freaked out because we saw a rattlesnake? Right? I could establish my connection and sympathy. Hey man, I've been really busy too lately. I've hardly had time to think. I can empathize with him. It sounds like you're busy too, man. Why do we work so much? It's really not fair to ourselves. And finally, I can suggest a beneficial solution. I've been thinking about going for a quick hike up Mount Si, get outside, enjoy some air, forget about work for a bit. And here I've also been really careful about word choice. A quick hike is a good way to sort of circumvent this fact that he's very busy and may not have time, or may say that he doesn't have time, right? Maybe if all else fails, I'll use the Jedi mind trick, right? But ultimately, we have to think about all of the different strategies that we can use and all of the strategies that we employ when we're getting into these situations. Either when I'm trying to convince an audience as myself, or when somebody else is trying to convince me and I am a member of the audience. Now, in full disclosure and full transparency, the way that the class is structured, I'm having you do the rhetorical analysis first and then work on a persuasive essay. So your last essay will actually be a persuasive essay. And the idea here is with the rhetorical essay, you're looking at all of the strategies that somebody could use to convince somebody, and then you're taking all of those strategies and choosing, much as I said at the beginning of this video, which ones work best for the scenario that you're trying to, in which you're trying to convince somebody. Okay, I hope that helps. Email me with questions. There will be some additional videos this week about the 4 pieces that you could choose to rhetorically analyze. As you read, Read actively. That's the key, right? Highlight, annotate, underline, whatever it is, because you need to fully understand not only the speech or essay or whatnot, but what strategies are being used. A rhetorical analysis, again, operates on the idea that you are taking a close look at what is being said and how it's being said in order to have a specific response. All right, have a good one. Email me with questions and have a good day.